This next exercise is going to be a weight lift, and we already talked about it a bit when we analyzed our reference for a different video. In this lecture, we're going to talk about the body mechanics of a weight lift, just like we did with the weight shift and the jump, just so we know how it all works and what happens to your body when lifting something heavy. I'd say this is probably the most difficult exercise in the intermediate series, because not only are we animating a character, we're also going to be dealing with constraints for the first time. And on top of that, we need to find a convincing way to show that the object is actually heavy. So one of the ways to show force and weight is through body posture. As Brian gets ready to pick up the ball, the body has a very distinct C-curve. The whole body is bent forward, reaching for the ball. And before the lifting begins, the arms are dangling straight down, but you can tell that there isn't really any tension in them. In fact, if Brian had squatted lower, the arms would be bent at this point, right? But then once the body starts traveling up, you can see the arms become very straight and almost buckling the other way. And this is because they're fighting gravity. And this tension in the arms is an excellent way to show weight. And I know that this is not a proper lifting technique, because ideally you're supposed to use your legs to lift heavy objects to avoid hurting your back. But since this is an animated character we're going to be dealing with, it doesn't matter. When lifted this way, we get this nice curve in the back, and as the body travels up, there's almost a drag. You can see the neck is pushing up, but there's still a curve on the back because it's being pulled down at this point. And you can also really feel the tension in the shoulders. Something else you need to keep in mind when animating a heavy lift is that once the object is in the air, like on this frame for example, the arms need to be vertical. Completely vertical. And this is again because gravity is pulling the arms down. If you added any type of angle to the arms, so instead of going vertical, they're now going this way, it will immediately break the illusion of weight and the object will appear much lighter. Just imagine the amount of muscle you'd have to lift a heavy object at this angle. Not only is it hard to do, but it's also inefficient, and we already know that our bodies are pretty lazy and try to find the easiest way to move. This is also why you can see the knees going sideways and making room for that ball to pass through, instead of the arms going at an angle like this. Something else that really helps sell the idea of weight is showing the struggle. And this can be done in many different ways. Maybe the character goes to pick up the object in one way because they don't expect it to be heavy, but once they realize it won't move, they try a different technique. And you can also show it through expressions like here on Brian's face, as well as through these foot adjustments that help him stay in balance. Different acting choices usually require different actions to go with them, but remember that if your character doesn't show any sign of struggle when picking up an object, it will make the object feel light. Something else that Brian is doing is helping himself by using his body to carry some of the weight of the ball instead of just relying on his hands. And here's where the reversal of posture comes into play. So we started with a nice strong C-curve going forward, but as he stands up, the body has now changed into a reverse S-curve. His hip is being pushed forward and leaning upwards like this. Here he is kind of almost resting the medicine ball on his stomach for a moment. If we were just animating the first half of the action, which is going down, lifting the ball, and then just resting with it in his arms, then what would happen is that the medicine ball momentum would go up and then it would want to continue going this way. And that would force Brian to take a couple of steps back to regain his balance. So if you decide to make your exercise just this part, which is totally fine, that's probably what's gonna happen to you. But just definitely take a reference and see what happens to your own body. But because we do have this next section of him putting down the medicine ball on a platform here, Brian already starts pushing his body forward and twisting in that direction and taking that extra little step ahead of time. So he's fighting the momentum of the medicine ball that would normally want to go back here, and he's pushing it forward. And another big reason why the medicine ball looks so heavy is because when he's pushing it forward to sit it down on this platform, he isn't really able to just extend his arms forward with the medicine ball in them and just put it down. Imagine if he was holding something like a balloon, he would be able to do that without any struggle. But in this case, he is helping himself with the entire upper body. And then once the gravity takes over, the medicine ball kind of slams against the platform and his whole body travels forward. So there's an overshoot before he settles into his final pose. And he kind of has to stop himself using his arms on the medicine ball. Otherwise, his body would just continue traveling forward and he would fall over. So again, he's not just using his arms for this motion, he's using his whole body, and the whole body kind of reacts after. So now that we're combining several actions together of going up and then going forward and having an overshoot and then a settle, with some acting here of him wiping his brow, we still see the same principles of animation and body mechanics applying to these actions, but it's just not as obvious as it would be if it was just an isolated action. So now you gotta start thinking about how you're combining things and how you're still showing the weight and the physics of everything. And another thing we need to talk about is speed. Obviously, it will take much less effort and time to pick up a light object. You just bend down and pick it up immediately without any struggle. With a heavy object, it will take more time and the object will take longer to pick up speed. You can see that the spacing here is very tight for a while, and once it picks up speed, it becomes much bigger. Through here, the ball moves a lot, but down here, it just moves very little. And this is the reason why we did the exercise comparing different materials in the beginner section, because you need to understand how different materials and weights behave before you can tackle these more complicated exercises. And the final rule of body mechanics for this exercise that I want to talk about is the center of gravity. We already know that in order to maintain balance, there always has to be an equal amount of weight on each side of the body. But now we also need to consider the added weight of the medicine ball. As soon as he picks up the medicine ball, this weight changes where the center of gravity is. First of all, when you're carrying something heavy, you need a wider stance on your legs so that you don't fall over. But the extra weight here is also a reason for that S-curve in the body. You can see that now there is more weight in the front of the body with this medicine ball here. So in order to balance it out, his torso is leaning back now so that we have this weight pushing this way. And as a rule, you always want to keep the object's center of gravity close to the center of gravity of your character. So you can see that they're very close together. In fact, the medicine ball is touching his body. It can't go any closer than this. He wouldn't really be able to just stand there and have the medicine ball in his hand right here with the center of gravity right here. Because first of all, his arm wouldn't be able to hold it up and it would fall. Or it would mean that this object is so light that it really isn't a struggle to hold it so far away from the body. So for example, if you're holding something like a balloon or a beach ball, you're able to do this easily. But with a medicine ball, you never see anyone holding it this way. And again, we're just gonna be using a 3D object that could be any weight you want, but these differences in posture, force, the struggle, and the center of gravity are the reason why the ball might look either heavy or it might look light. So you really need to be careful with these things. Okay, so that was the body mechanics part of a weight lift. Let's get a bit more technical now and talk about constraints. First of all, if you're not familiar with how to create constraints in Blender, go to the Blender Basics course and check out the constraints series there, especially the video on child of constraint. There's also an amazing add-on called Dynamic Parent, and we've made a video on that one as well. It's really up to you which one you want to use to create your constraints, but since the add-on is free and it's very user-friendly, I just suggest using that. So first things first, when creating a constraint, you need to think about which object will be the parent and which one will be the child. The parent is the one that's driving the motion, and the child is the one that's being affected by the motion. To figure this out, I just like to scrub and analyze my animation and see what is driving what. So in our case, it's kind of 50-50 with the ball and the hands. So for example here, when the hands pick up the ball, they're kind of being dragged down by the ball. So I would say the ball is driving the action. But then as he picks it up and the arms start bending, I would say through here and through the push here, it's the body and the arms driving the action. And then here, it's again the ball. Some people like to follow a rule where the object is heavier than the hands, then the object is the one driving the motion, and vice versa. So for example, when holding a phone, the hand would be the parent. But with something as heavy as our pumpkin, the pumpkin would be the one driving the action. You can do what makes most sense to you, but I decided that I want the screen left hand right here to be the parent, and I'm just gonna be leaving that hand in IK and in God space so that when I later go up to pick up the pumpkin, the arm is gonna stay in world space and I'm able to get that dragging motion. Otherwise, if I had the hand in, for example, cog space, as soon as I lift the spine or the center of gravity, the arm is gonna be going with it and we're gonna start getting that angle that we don't wanna have. But with God space, the arm just stays vertical. I personally just didn't want to be animating the pumpkin first and then affecting the hands, because I feel like the hands and the body are working together, especially through here, to push the pumpkin. So I felt like I wanted the arms to be driving that motion. But I'll share with you this tweet from JD, who is a fantastic animator and a YouTuber, and he showed this example of the flea from Bug's Life with a huge match in its hand. In that case, I agreed that the match should be driving the motion because it moves in these big swoops that affect the entire body posture because it's so heavy and so much bigger than the flea. But if you had a regular size match in your own hand, the hand would definitely be the one driving the motion because it's much heavier and bigger than the match. So again, it's totally up to you and the specific needs of your shot and just your own preferences. And for the other hand, it's gonna be hidden behind the ball or the pumpkin for a lot of the animation. So that's just gonna be constrained to the pumpkin, and basically it's just gonna be copying the motion of this front hand driving everything. And before you set your constraint, you really wanna work out this pose of the hand touching the pumpkin and the nice grip. And you want to do it properly without faking anything. And the reason for that is because if you decide to render your shot later and the hand is some distance away from the pumpkin, then you will start seeing a shadow in between. And at the same time, you also don't want any major visible intersections of the fingers and the pumpkin either. It's just much easier to take some time and get the grip done properly before creating the constraint than going back later and trying to readjust the entire grip. So constraints are kind of the secondary thing that comes after the nice pose. Okay, we're done. I know that was a lot of information, but now we're hopefully ready to tackle this exercise with confidence. And since we've already analyzed the reference for a different video, we're just gonna jump straight into Blender and get to work. So I'll see you there in the next video.